In the fourth chapter, fourth Mishnah, Rav Levitas Yishavna Omer. Rav Levitas, the man of Yavna, had said, Ma'od havishval ruach. Very, very much, you must be low-spirited, meaning it's referring to humility. It's not you should be very humble, but very, very humble. Shetikvas enish rima, because ultimately, the person is going to be turned into worms. He's food for the worms. So if a person is cognizant of that, therefore, there's nothing to pride yourself with other than keep your eye on the ball, address the objective why you exist, and don't become distracted believing who you are. Therefore, you should be very, very humble. So this famous Rambam, the Rambam in the Laws of Deus, where the Rambam discusses human character, how a person has to behave, and he explains there's a famous coined expression from Rambam he refers to as the Shvil Hazov, the golden path. What is the golden path in life? That you should always be in the equidistant location from both extremes. So where are you? You're exactly in the center. And he explains that people are born with various characteristics, predilections, and inclinations. A person is naturally born humble. A person is naturally born pompous. A person is naturally born where he has an insatiable appetite for material. Another person is almost stoic. And he speaks about the various kinds of personalities. And he speaks about, you have to deal with this. Because to be in a position where you're extreme in character, it's a problem. So how do you get to that equidistant point? By going to the opposite, like a pendulum. You go to the opposite extreme, and eventually you come to the center. So that equidistant point in the center is referred to as the golden path. Exactly down the middle, that's the golden path. However, when it comes to humility, there's no golden path. You always have to continuously suppress the ego. And that's what the Mishnah tells us, Havi ma'od ma'od. It's re-emphasizing, as much as we say it, it's not enough. You just have to keep suppressing that ego of yours. To be humble and humble and humble as much as we say it, it's not enough. You can't forget that everything hinges on humility. You have humility, you have clarity. You don't have humility, then you don't have any clarity, because it's always your narrative. It's nobody else's narrative. And even it's God's narrative, it's your version of God's narrative, but it's not really his narrative. But any other characteristic, whether you're generous, you're phenomenally naturally generous, it's not a good thing. Why isn't it a good thing? So we explain, why was man created? When man was created to meet challenges, and Hashem presents challenges to every one of us. And each person's challenge is tailor-made to his own personal objective. As we explained, although all Jewish souls are of the same dimension in terms of their special status, but each soul is unique in its own right, and each soul has to be perfected. And the perfecting mechanism is called choice, free choice. That when you're presented with a challenge and you meet that choice, which Hashem provided for you, then you bring about that level of perfection, which your soul needs that perfection. And each of us have our tailor-made life challenges, because each of us has to address what has to be addressed on a personal level. Now, a person we always speak about objectivity. A person's objective, then you're able to see things pretty much in their context, what they are. But if a person has a conflict of interest, you don't see things correctly. So let's say a person is born naturally very overly generous or very generous, and he leans more to the generous side than the non-generous side. Somebody comes and presents you with a request, or you see something and you feel a cause has to be addressed, and due to your natural inborn predilection and characteristics of doing kindness and being selflessly committed to others, immediately you go there. But you realize it may not be the right thing. because it's not the right thing to go there, because maybe the cause that you're attracted to may not be the right cause. And if even it is the right cause, to what degree do you get involved? Your evaluation is off because naturally you're overly generous. And as a result of that, you have to reach the midpoint, which is the golden path, which is the equidistant point between the both extremes. As a result of that, now you're in a position, the reason why you're attracted was not because you're inclined to that, but rather it's an intellectual evaluation of whatever that may be. So now that you're objective as a human being could be, now we could talk about pretty much making a responsible evaluation, should you or should you not. That is the context, the ultimate context of free choice, that the intellect should be the driving force, not the emotion. Because the moment the emotion gets involved, I'll give you an example. A person naturally miserly, not giving, withholding, and somebody approaches him to help him, to support a cause, on a subconscious level, immediately he has already 15 reasons not to give it. He's tied up, he's busy, he's not liquid, it's not his kind of thing, it's not his cup of tea. You remembered he heard something, endless reasons immediately, but all that emanates from his inborn characteristic of being withholding, not being generous. You have to get that out of your system. Only once you get that out of your system, by going to the opposite extreme and eventually the pendulum concept, and you end up with in the equidistant point, now we can talk about objectivity. Now you have no reason to embrace it or not embrace it. Now you make a rational, responsible evaluation, and that's why that is the golden path. The golden path is the equidistant point from both extremes. That's the understanding of the Rambam. However, when it comes to humility, as much as we try to be humble, and we've gone through the exercise endless times over to suppress it, the moment you turn a blind eye on that ego of yours, it immediately inflates. It's going up. The mercury is rising. You're going right back up there. And the moment you have that ego involved, that immediately it topples the apple cart. You're seeing things through a colored lens, and the lens is yourself. And as a result of that, that becomes the problem. Therefore, Reb Levitas, the man of Yavne, says, Ma'od havishval ruach. It's not enough just to be humble. You have to be very humble. It's not even enough to be very humble. You have to be very, very humble. Meaning as much as we repeat it and we reiterate it, you can let it out of your sight and your consciousness. You have to be cognizant of what that is and where it could take you. Therefore, continuously, you have to somehow chip away at that ego and suppress it, and then hopefully you'll have clarity due to that. That's the understanding. Now, Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, God says he's in the Garden of Eden. As it says, he has clarity, he sees from one end of the world to another. And he tells his wife, he heard the command directly from God. His wife, he passed it on to his wife after she was created. And he told her something, and he said to her, not only did God say you should not eat of the tree of knowledge, you should not even touch the tree of knowledge. But he didn't tell her it's offense, but he told her that is the word of Hashem. The provision is not only eating, it's even touching. But all the trees of the garden are permitted. Right away, the ancient serpent gets involved, and he goes and he pushes her into the tree. After she tells him that I'm not permitted to eat or even touch, he pushes the tree. And she sees right away, she's not dying. She sees, so the serpent says to her, you see, God is duping you. He's deceiving you. It's because you have certain creative powers. If you eat of this tree, God doesn't need competition. If you eat of this tree, you become a creator, and God is the only creator in this moment. But if you eat of that tree, because that's how God received his creative powers, by eating of that tree. And she bought it like stock and barrel, and she ate of the tree of knowledge. The moment she ate of that tree of knowledge, she felt the negative effects. And she realized the snake really did her in, and she's going to die. Because God say, when you eat of that tree, you become subject to death. She doesn't have the clarity she had. She goes to her husband and says, Adam, you know what's going to happen now? I'm going to die. God's going to create another wife for you. if I'm going, you're going with me. That's what she said to him. There's no such thing as, so Adam went and he ate of the tree of knowledge. Could you imagine? A man, due to his irresponsibility, his wife, God forbid, puts her life in jeopardy and she's going to die. Man says, well, since I'm the cause, I'm going to commit suicide because I caused you to, your life should be now in jeopardy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right? How does it make sense? So there's now Rizal. Now Rizal says, we read in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Tzaragra. The greater the challenge, the greater is the value of the result if you meet that challenge. Adam at this moment, as it says, he had almost absolute clarity. He saw from one end of the world to the other. The moment he ingests that tree, that fruit, which has this unadulterated evil in it, he has a colored view of things. The challenge becomes literally almost impossible, but he feels he can make that challenge. So if he succeeds in that challenge, how much greater is his level of worth and value of service to Hashem? Therefore, he ate. That's how we justified eating it. So I said like this, Adam had tremendous guilt. He was the cause of his wife's demise now. Because if he would have, because he told her it was the word of God and not offense. Now, and the snake was able, that was the basis why the snake was able to deceive her. He pushed her into the tree. But you say, it doesn't make sense. Because you're going to die, I should die. So he had to come up with this new approach. And the evil inclination puts it in your head. What's the approach? That if you eat, and now your whole vision becomes colored totally, because now you're addicted to evil, and despite that you're going to succeed, you become a hero. Because the Lefum Tzaragra. And he eats, and God says, son, I'm not looking for heroes. I want you to just do what I'm supposed to do. Therefore, now you become subject to death, and you can no longer be in the Garden of Eden. He's driven out of the Garden of Eden. That's what it's all about. Now, why did he eat? If God says no, even though your wife's life now is coming to an end, because Adam himself, being the most perfect creation, being the center of the universe, having that innate value, he says, something, I also have what to say. It was the ego. It was the ego. The ego allowed him to make this kind of calculation. A person doesn't understand physics whatsoever. And he goes to Einstein and says, I have an insight and I think we should take another path. You're talking to Einstein. You can't even add three numbers together. God says, don't. And God understands the principle of Lefum Tzaragra, the greater the challenge. God says, under no circumstance. Well, something, I'm going to be the superhero. God says, not look for heroes. So why do you even have the audacity to allow yourself that slack to go in and make this kind of calculation? Talk to God here. The answer is that's the ego. That's so. And the ego allowed him to make this decision. And the Gemara tells us, Adam, when he ate of the tree of knowledge, God did not exist at that moment. It says he was a heretic at that moment. How could he be a heretic? He's in the Garden of Eden. Because God created a human being that had his ability to go into a state of denial, as if, even though it's a reality, things exist, your reality is they don't exist. At that moment, God did not exist, because if he had a sense of God at that moment, it would have been impossible to eat of the tree of knowledge. It was only because he was able to somehow suppress that reality, he was able to eat it. But what drove him to that? His ego. I also have a right. This person says, I wasn't thinking. Why aren't you thinking? It's so obvious. Because the answer is because I wanted to do it. Because when you want to do something enough, then everything else is blotted out. But that's the ego. As a result of that, the ego is what actually determines one's life. That drives us. But it has to be kept in check. I mean, why does a person want to advance in anything in life? Nobody's born a tzaddik. Nobody's born a tzaddik. When you serve God, it says you should serve God not for the sake of reward, just to serve the master. If you're born a tzaddik and you have that level of clarity and you understand who the master is, you serve God with that pure intent. But where do you start? You don't start at that level. We need incentives. We need all kinds of perks. Do you know what it means if you serve God? You'll get a piece of the pie not to be believed. God says, if you follow my path, you'll have bounty, you'll have blessing, you have flocks and herds and children, protected, no disease, no illness. What do we need all these incentives? Why? The answer is because nobody's born a tzaddik. So basically, the first step, a child, before he learns to crawl, to walk, he has to crawl. To crawl, the parent has to coax the child. And the parent stays in front of the child and has a toy and draws the child next to it, and the parent gets all excited. When we come into this existence, or like that child who just begins to crawl, we need every incentive to coax us, to draw us, to just do the right thing. We'll worry about the why later. Down the road, we'll worry about the why. But we want to communicate to the person that it's in your best interest. So if the emphasis is your best interest, what's the driving? So what is it? You're inflating the ego. It's you. It's you. It's you. It's you. And it begins with you and ends with you. That's the ego. But before the sin of the tree of knowledge, we didn't need any incentives. The level of clarity was obvious. It was obvious what it was. Because the evil inclination didn't blind the person. The person saw what it was. But the moment you introduced the evil, and that becomes an innate, integral part of the person, the ego now the ego is inflated and almost uncontrollable. And therefore, every moment, the moment you have a sense it's rising, suppress it over and over again. And that's why Ravit says, it's very interesting. We have mentioned the Gemara many times, and I'm sure you all remember it. The story with Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananya and the daughter of the emperor. When she met him, she said to him, I've never seen such an ugly man in my life. So how could such beautiful wisdom be contained in such an ugly vessel? When I'm repeating the Gemara, but it's another insight in what the Gemara, what he answered her. So how could such wisdom, beautiful wisdom, be contained in such an ugly vessel? So he says to her, he says, your father, he has such precious wines. Where does he store them? In ordinary earthenware casks. A person like the emperor, they should be stored, transferred into golden silver casks. Immediately, the wisest Jew gives her, he's the advisor to her father. Immediately, she gives the order, everything's transferred. 3 days pass, the king asks for his prize wine. The wine steward says everything soured, spoiled. He says, what happened? Well, your daughter said to me, we should transfer everything from the earthenware casks. Since we made that transfer, that's where everything actually turned to vinegar. So she calls his daughter and says, what did you do? He says, well, I followed the advice of the wisest Jew, your advisor. He summons Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananya. He says, why did you advise my daughter, knowing what the end result will be? He says, because your daughter asked me a question. How could such beautiful wisdom, precious wisdom, be stored in such an ugly vessel, such an ordinary, ugly vessel? He says, the Torah is compared to 3 beverages, 3 liquids: water, wine, and milk. Why? Because Torah itself is compared to water, and water flows from an elevated location to a low location. It goes from the incline to the lower location. Torah itself, you could only process it, understand it, and retain it if you go to the low location, if you're humble. Torah cannot be contained or processed unless you have a humble spirit. That's the prerequisite for Torah. In addition, it's like wine. An earthenware cask gives of its nothing, doesn't contribute. It absorbs, it gives out nothing. Gold and silver, as precious as it may be, if the elements of the silver gold intermingle with the wine, it causes it to sour. Torah has to be pristine, unadulterated, God's wisdom. But what happens if you're a super genius? You always want to contribute a little bit. Your ego gets in there. What do you want to contribute? If God said, this is it, but you know something, I have another spin. I have an insight, phenomenal, it's my genius. And you want to put it forth. People should appreciate your genius, know who you are. But you know what the result, what the consequence of that is? The wine spoils. Because the word that you're communicating, or what you're denying, and you believe it's the truth, and nobody can even refute it. That's what kind of genius you are. But factually, what you're delivering is not the genuine product. It's not the pristine Torah that God gave. So what interferes, what detracts, as the gold contributes to the wine, your ego contributes or detracts from the Torah. Because your element is intermingling there, and that automatically takes away and detracts its purity. Therefore, it's no longer unadulterated Torah. And what's milk? Milk, if any uncleanliness falls in there, the milk spoils. Now, there's a verse, David Melech says that Kol Gova Lev is Tovas Hashem. A person who has an inflated ego, he's an abomination in God's eyes. Who do you think you are? You understand? To be able to have relevance to Torah, that's an uncleanliness. Some impurity goes into the milk spoils. It sours. But what is that impurity? That impurity is the ego. Whether it's water, whether it's wine, or whether it's milk, it spoils. As a result of that, if the whole objective of creation is Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'ha'aretz, for the sake of Torah, for the sake of the Jewish people, and we are the only ones who have capacity to have relevance to it. But if you got that ego, you don't have Torah, because the ego doesn't allow the water to function as water, the wine to retain its purity as wine, and the milk to be pure without that impurity in it, without that filth that goes in it, which causes it to spoil. So again, this advice or this perspective, everything the Shvil Azov, the golden path, is the equidistant point for both extremes. But when it comes to ego, you have to keep suppressing it, because the essence of the person, because of the tree of knowledge, is the ego. And that ego is always self-inflates. Today many years ago, Michelin was considered the top line tire on a car, because they came out with a tire that even if a nail went in there or something, it had like a metal lining, so the tire didn't puncture immediately, so it didn't deflate. Came up with such a tire. Then they came out with a new kind of tire. When they came out with the Hummer has a tire that the moment it punctures, it reinflates immediately. So therefore, and you could go like for 200 miles until you have it repaired. Of course, it reinflates. We have an ego that the moment you deflate it, it reinflates immediately. You don't have to go to the automotive store to get that can and attach it and pump in the stuff into ourselves. It reinflates. So how do you keep it at a deflated level, that low level, that humble level? Ma'od havishval ruach. You always have to keep pounding it. It's interesting. I'm not into culinary, but Bob is. He enjoys spending time in the kitchen, especially when he puts on his apron and that hat, and his wife gives him a few compliments. She made his day. They buy meat from the East Side Butcher, whatever his name is, and they buy only the first cut, because when it comes to the holiday, that's the mitzvah, and he has a mallet, and he starts pounding that meat. Because if the guests come and they say it's a little tough, his wife gives him, a look. It doesn't bode well for him. So he takes that mallet, hammers it. By the time Yom Tov's over, they have to repair the counter in the kitchen. That's to what degree he does it. You got to hammer it to soften it. Otherwise, it doesn't absorb. For us to be able to get it, you got to hammer away at that ego. It has to be hammered and hammered and hammered. Havi mod shval ruach. And only once you deflate it and deflate it, then you start to have clarity. That's the reality of the human being. Because everything is based upon what is objective, what is perspective, what's the driving force. Is it me, I, or is it something more altruistic, and which allows the objectivity and clarity and light to shine in your life? Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Now, it's very interesting. This is the insight I came about Shabbos. The Daf Yomi, yesterday's and today, says, Reb Yitzchak says that Yitzur shel Odom mischadi shelo b'chol yom. that the evil inclination of the person renews itself every single day. It's a continuous renewal. Meaning yesterday's inclination is not today's. Today, and as it says, cites a verse in Tehillim, the evil inclination is so adept and so ingenious, he can run rings around us and we don't even realize it. And if not God's intervention, you cannot survive it. So the only reason why you have any sense of clarity is because God intervenes. That's the way it is. But how does he, what's his ingenious approach? So the commentators explain in the Ein Yaakov, that, which is the commentator on all the Aggadic portions of the Shas, of the Talmud, he explains the person, person eats a certain type of food, day in and day out. Eventually you tire from it. That's what you do. And you want something new. A new sushi store opened up down the block. Till now, I've been paying $3 a portion. This is 20, must be something else. It's the exact same sushi. They just put it on a fancy plate. When you eat it, you think you're eating something that you haven't eaten before. That's how you're deceived. The evil inclination, you could violate that, transgress that sin day in and day out for your whole life. Every time he presents it to you, it's with the same gusto, with a desire overwhelming, almost that you can't control yourself. Grow up. You should get tired of it already. He has the ability to present it in a new light. It's like a renewal. Every time he comes to, it's a renewal. But how could it be? I've been through this endless times. I even had remorse. I regretted it. Yeah, but I regretted something else. This is something else. This is a new thing. This is not that original sin. What do you mean it's not the same? It's the same non-kosher. It's the same woman that you weren't permitted to be with. It's the same. What do you mean he could present it as if it's a different woman, although she's clothed and looks exactly like she looked. It's a new thing. It's a new reality. How? But he has that ability. Now, what happened at Sinai? When we said Nasa v'nishma, what transformation took place for the Jewish people? We were worthy, and we reached a level of angels. God says, who revealed the secret to my children? They speak like angels. Nasa v'nishma, to commit yourself where you don't know even the extent of obligation, and you're ready to accept the charge, whatever it is, whatever the extent is. That level of faith, it's unheard of. We rose to the level of Adam pre-sin at that moment. And the Talmud quotes a verse that at that moment we were no longer subject to death. We went pre-sin. So the effect of the sin of the tree of knowledge was no longer relevant to us. What happened? 40 days later, there was a miscalculation. Moshe, they believed, was supposed to return, and they believed he died. Satan went and darkened the world, and they saw Moshe's remains being carried in heaven. They said, Moshe, our leader, is no longer here. We need a God to lead us. We need an intermediary. And the rabble was there. They presented, we have a solution, the golden calf. That'll be the deity. And the Jews were attracted to it. God says to Moshe, your people have become corrupted. Go down. He goes down with the first set of Luchos tablets. He sees this. He smashes the tablets at the foot of the mountain. The tablets, the letters were fire. When those tablets smashed, what happened to the letters? So the Talmud says the letters, they floated heavenward. What did that symbolize? The floating of the letters. They evaporated. They dissipated. They blurred. Because the tablets were broken, therefore, a Jew is subject to forgetting. We're subject to forget. Therefore, Torah, unless you continuously review it and review it and review it, you're not going to retain it because you'll be subject to forgetting it. And that's what the symbolism of the letters flowing heavenward. So I asked the question, Why does the breaking of the tablets cause forgetting? Now, when we sinned with golden calf, we reverted back to post-sin. Post-sin, now we're subject to death. Before, when we were pre-sin, we would have lived eternally. The world would have reached its level of perfection. But because, unfortunately, before that closing moment, the word mess up is not even, it's an understatement. Therefore, we reverted back to post-sin. In a post-sin state, we're subject to death. The Talmud tells us that if a person would experience the pain of death continuously for the rest of his life when he loses a loved one, you cannot survive emotionally and mentally that pain, that loss. So therefore, God introduced into humanity forgetting. So we only forget because otherwise we couldn't survive the trauma and the pain and the grief of losing a loved one. So since when the tablets were broken, we reverted back to post-sin. Post-sin was subject to death. If there's death, we have to forget. Once you're forgetting, it's a double-edged sword. You forget that, you forget everything. So therefore, to get back into the saddle, you have to continuously review and review and review. Otherwise, what you knew, even what you considered, even if you have instant recall, it's not the same. You remember the tragedy, it's not the same. It's not that first moment. As a result of that, that's why the breaking of tablets, the letters floating heavenward, symbolically what it represented was the forgetting of the Torah. Now, this phenomenon. The evil inclination seduces you, ensnares you, and it gives you a level of temptation that you almost can't control. But of course you have control, but you succumb to temptation. And you experience that temptation. And afterwards you realize you did the wrong thing. And you're in the doghouse. What happens the next day? He presents you with the same temptation. Due to the fact we forget, when he presents it again, it's a new temptation. Because forgetting automatically minimizes and blurs that reality, and now all of a sudden it comes into focus. We see it as a different reality. So therefore, we never tire of doing the wrong thing. Because even though we remember the act that we did, but in terms of we were touched emotionally and desire-wise, temptation-wise, because there is that issue of forgetting, it's a new experience. That's the evil is mechadesh. Every day he renews it. He presents it again, but when he presents it, it's like you never experienced it before. Because what he's presenting now, the aspect of it, the action may be the same action, but it's a different reality because we are subject to forgetting. But simultaneously, what is the only antidote to address that, to incapacitate it, to realize the reality of what that is? The only antidote is the study of Torah. So what is the Torah? When was the Torah at a level that we had absolute clarity? So but you studied Torah yesterday. But to study Torah yesterday, unless you review it now, it's old hat. It doesn't have that vibrancy. So how do you renew it? You have only that Torah in its full presentation doesn't have the ability to incapacitate. Is it an antidote? Therefore, the knowledge yesterday's Torah is not the same. So when you study it, it has to be to bring it back to that pristine state of Torah. Therefore, it's Yubeinecha Kadoshos. Just as when you have the temptation, because of forgetting, it's like a new presentation of it, like you never experienced it before. And that's the attraction. When it comes to Torah, it has to be at the same level. Only when you experience the holiness in that context, only then is an antidote to counter that new experience that you don't want to succumb to. Therefore, the Torah itself is the antidote for that. But it's only if you study it not as old hat, but rather as something new and vibrant. Because it's only due to forgetting is due to that same, but it's interesting. When it comes to desire, you to remember what you experienced. He presents it like it's a new temptation. When it comes to Torah, you're in a forgetful state. You don't remember the specialness of it, the way you were touched. You understand? If a person would only remember the way he was touched, he wouldn't stop going after it because he'd realize how special it was. So why doesn't he? Because you forget. So you need that extra effort to apply yourself to reach a state of not only engaging in it, but that you should appreciate what it truly is. I'll give you an example. I once told the story of this person. Years ago, there was a person who was come to Yad Avram. Alan remembers him. His name was Marvin Tisser. Okay? And one day he tells me he wants to bring somebody to speak to me. Okay? So I said, fine, bring him. He brings this person. The person must be about 6'6". And I'm not sure which marriage he was in already. Maybe his third, fourth, or fifth marriage. And he had one son. And he was a man in his 50s who was going to be bar mitzvah at Park East Synagogue in about 2 months. And he comes in to me, introduces himself, sits down, and Tisser says, I think you'd like to be by yourselves. He walks out, sits down, all of a sudden he starts crying. So I said, why are you crying? He says, a year ago today, it's the anniversary of my heart transplant. I said, you should be ecstatic because you have the heart transplant. You lived another year. He says, you don't understand. My body is rejecting the heart. And I'm not sure if I'm even going to make it to my son's bar mitzvah. It's my only child. His wife must have been 10, 15 years younger than he was. He had a child with this woman, and this is his son. This man at the time was worth $40 million. He's in the real estate business. So I said, look, you should be optimistic and hopeful. As God gave you a heart the first time, with God's help, they'll find another heart for you, especially you're a young relative, you're a young person and a healthy person. So you're a candidate to receive a new heart. So I said to him, you gained a year of life because you had the heart. Tell me, how did you thank God? If God gave you a year of life, how did you say thank you? I said, did you study Torah? Did you? He says, when I went to Talmud Torah, it didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. It's not for me. Okay. I said, what about charity? Did you give charity? He says, I gave a few $100. The man's worth $40 million. He gave a few $100 to charity. That's his thank you. So I said to him, I said, you know what you remind me of? I give a person $1 million cashier's check. And after I give it to him, he walks out and somebody says to him, by the way, did you say thank you? Person says, something, I'm out of here. I'm not going back. I said, you remind me of that person. God gives you something in your life and you tell me to give a few $100 to charity. That's what you do. That's your thank you. You know something? It doesn't sit well with me. I wish you luck. Have a good day. And that was the end of the discussion. He did not make it to his son's bar mitzvah. They did not find the heart. The man died. His wife inherited, was his heir. The boy was his heir. Maybe the wife was the executor of the estate. I'm not sure. But he went, he bit, as they say, he bit the dust. Tikvas edosh rima. What is the last moment of man's life? He's food for the worms, for the maggots. That's the end of the story. I mean, if God gives you something so precious, how are you not excited about it? And it's the weaponry, the only weaponry you could have to counter what it's all about. How are you not excited about it? Well, that's the way it is. You know something? You're at the gallows. I'm not taking you off the gallows. It's your problem. How do you not recognize? This is the only solution. This is the only remedy. This is the only so-called antidote. There's no other antidote. So it has to be chadoshos. When you approach it, it has to be with excitement. God gave us life. This is the new heart. You know, a person who has a transplant of kidney, anything, he has to take certain medication because the body naturally rejects it because it senses it's not part of the system. So you have to take certain type of very strong medication to suppress the immune system because the immune system tries to reject it. Now, what suppresses the immune system of the Jew? Because now the immune system is what? Is the evil inclination. You need that strong medication, that strong antidote. It's called Torah. And you got to take it, the dosage as recommended. You have to take it that you see it as special. It's a lifesaver. Everything hinges on that. And you're given a dose of that, you're excited. You could function, you could live. But it's okay. And if I eat shrimp and lobster and who knows what, and I don't say a blessing, because it's the end of the world. You understand something? But where's the thank you? I'm giving you something. You don't appreciate what it is. Well, I'll do you a favor. I'll study for half an hour. But remember, half an hour, not a second more. I'm out here, Rabbi, in a half an hour because I got to I have a meeting. You know, I have a power breakfast at the hotel there, and is it kosher? It's okay, but it's a power breakfast. More power to him. You know, that's what it's all about. So forgetting. Even if you have that special experience, we forget. If we have to continuously review and review and review. The Rambam writes in the Laws of Talmud Torah, a Jew has an obligation to study to the last moment of your life. Why? Because the moment you stop studying, you forget. Those are words of Rambam. So not to forget, you have to be continuously engaged. What do you forget? I have instant recall. Forgetting doesn't mean that you forget information. The forgetting is the process. When you're involved in the process, you're touched. The moment you stop, you're no longer touched. Once you're no longer touched, it's not the same. So therefore, Rambam says, the Torah says you have an obligation to study to the last breath of your existence, if you could study. Because otherwise, the moment you stop, you begin forgetting. And since to be able to survive and succeed and address your objective, it's only when it's chadoshos. So therefore, it's very interesting. One of the six, after davening, the 6 positive commandments, 6 statements. One is Schiras Maimer Har Sinai. We should remember the Sinai event, how God gave us the Torah at Sinai, and not only for ourselves, to teach it to our children. It's a positive commandment. And even if we were not there, as it says, we're going to read, our souls were there. Every Jewish soul was at Sinai, although they were not there in physical form. So we have to remember that. Why is it so important to remember? Because that event, each of us received our portion of Torah to address the objective, because without it, you couldn't meet that objective. That's why it's the antidote. We need the challenge that it should have value. But we have to have the ability to meet the challenge. So therefore, the Torah in itself has the ability, that's the weaponry to meet the challenge. But you have to remember Sinai. What was Sinai? You were given that special portion of Torah. And that portion was given to you to be able to go to that battlefront and fight that battle for 70, 80, 90 years, although it's a forefront battle. It doesn't make a difference. But that's where you have to remember what Sinai was. Because that was communicated to every Jew that stood at that mountain. And God openly communicated. Whether physically we're there or not, it was communicated to our souls. So innately, we know that. Unfortunately, we forget. But we believe, but we forget. It's not the same. We say people have short memories. Do people favors, they forget. What this man owes this other person, he owes him his life. But yet the man, he takes it with a grain of salt. But how could you? He pulled you out of the gutter. He gave you your life, everything. Well, I sent him a Lashana Tovah card, You should have a Zisa New Year. That's the way you fulfill them. You should go to his door, knock on the door, and say, what do you need? I'm here at your disposal, at your beck and call. If that's what I did. Not that the benefactor wants it, But how do you behave this way? How? We just read in the Torah yesterday. Why will God forbid the curses come upon the Jewish people? Because you did not serve God with simcha, with joy, although he gave you everything. He put a golden crown studded with diamonds on you, put you on a pedestal, and you didn't serve God with joy. How do you not serve God with joy? As they say, you don't get it. You know, if you don't get it, you know what God does? He pushes you off the cliff. And maybe when you hit the bottom and you feel the pain, maybe you wake up and you start coming up and you start crawling up that mountain again with broken legs, with pain. But you didn't have to be pushed off the mountain. If you would have served God with joy, if you would only been appreciative, but we got short memories. Simcha is only if I recognize and it's vibrant. But you did it for me last week. Like there's an expression in English. What have you done for me recently? What have you done for me recently? Recently, what are you talking about? That you can even speak an intelligible sentence is only because what I did for you. And yes, what did I do for you recently? But again, it all goes back to the same thing. So I said, I'm not sure if I shared it with you. We say that Yesh lo manu rotza mosayim. You have 100, you want 200. What happens if you have 1,000? You want 2,000. You have 1,000,000, you want 2,000,000. So the more you have, the more the gap gets wider. Yeah, 100, you only want 100. So how far are you from what you want? 100. You have 1,000,000, how short are you of what you really want? You want another 1,000,000. That's Yesh lo manu rotza mosayim. Now it's interesting. Why? What is that all about? The more you have, the more you want. I'll give you an example. Somebody says, I'm going to give you a $5,000 gift. He's never received that kind of gift before. He's excited. He's touched in a special way. And the man says, I will give you $5,000 every week for the next 10 years. When it reaches the second month, the fifth time he's received it. The excitement and the feeling of appreciation, the second month, the fifth week is not the same as the first time you received it. Why? You still need the money. $5,000 is something you've never received before. But what happens in the second month? The man says, I'm going to give you 10,000. I think I'm going to give you more. Person gets excited. The man gave me 10,000. I've never ever received 10,000 before. Now 10,000 is going for another month. It's already waning a little bit. Third month comes, he gives you 15,000. You're excited again. It's unbelievable. The man is so special. But if it keeps going, somebody in Shabbos with me, he told me a story. He has a phenomenal yeshiva in Israel with a kol, everything. And he has one of his benefactors, gives him $60,000 a month to support it. And it doesn't cover the budget, but it's a significant contribution. And the person who gives them 1 month sends him in $10,000. In addition to the $60,000 he gets every month. And he gets all excited. And he writes him a letter thanking him. So he says to himself, that he gives me $60,000 a month, I don't get excited. But that he gives me an additional 10, I'm excited. He says, who am I? The person reprimanded himself. He should be excited every month that he's getting 60. We're not talking about giving him crumbs and pennies over here. So why did he get excited? The answer is because after a while, you believe it's coming to you. It's coming to you. Now he did something out of the ordinary. Oh, but the 10 is addition to the 60. 10 by itself means nothing. You get excited. So what is it all about? So the way I understand it's this, you can write a thesis in psychology on this one, that somebody goes and gives me a gift which is unheard of. He doesn't give this kind of gift to anybody. He chose you to give you a gift. What is that called? That's called an ego stroker. I really must be something special. Why did he give me the 5,000? I must be special. So my ego is inflated. When you touch a person's ego, He'll kiss the ground that you stand on, because the essence of a human being is his ego. What happens? Months pass, and he's still getting it. He feels, it becomes ordinary. Now he gives him another 5,000. All of a sudden, the ego's inflated again. He realizes I'm even more than worth 5,000. It gives me 10. So it's a new evaluation. The upgrade is a new evaluation. Who am I? I'm more than he thought I was before. I'm even more. So when you feel, you start glowing. And as he ups the amounts, you become, so let's say a person earns $1,000. He wants 2,000. Why? Because if I could earn 1,000, what is my worth? My worth is 1,000. As a result of that, if now that I understand I have another level of worth, I'm not satisfied with 1,000. I need a multiple of that. And let's say I make $1 million. How many people make $1 million? This is something special. That quantifies who I am. If I could earn $1 million, I think I deserve another million. So the amount that he gets, it always goes in duplicates, because that says that's my worth. And if I'm worth that is my value, I think I deserve another. You're always looking what you don't have, because if that's what I have, I definitely deserve more. But if a person has nothing, what do you have to say about yourself? Nothing. But the moment you start climbing that ladder, that's just who I am. If that's who I am, I think I deserve more. I'm entitled to more. So all of a sudden, the entitlement starts resonating within you. And therefore, there's no end to it. But that's only if it's you. What about the person understands he has an objective? And you paid that to be able to address your objective. A person works for a company, and he has a company credit card to cover whatever the responsibility of that company is. Is this man ego stroked? Has nothing to do with his ego. He has an objective. The credit card, that he goes to the best restaurants to wine and dine the clients of the company, that has nothing to do with him. But look, all this money at his disposal, but it's not for him, it's for the company. If you live your life that you believe and understand that there's a mission, and the mission goes back to Sinai, and you have an objective, you understand? Getting that money doesn't touch your ego, because it's not me, it's the Torah. Each person's objective is tailor-made to himself. Every person has tailor-made challenges. God provides whatever means you need to meet those challenges. But what is the objective of those challenges? The Torah. So it's not me. As a result of that, it doesn't say who you are. But if you don't believe in that, or you forget about it, and you don't remember the Sinai event, why do I have this? I must be special. If I must be special, so I think I deserve more. And you want more. What does that drive? That drives envy. If he has more, why shouldn't I have more? But if you understand, it's only given to you because to address your objective. It has nothing to do with the me. It's purely to address. So that somebody else has more, what does that have to do with me? I have to do what I have to do. Well, he works for a company. He has a greater expense account. You sure? Because that's what he has to do. I don't have those expenses. I only have to address what I have to address. Therefore, there's no envy. And therefore, I keep my eye on the ball. I don't get distracted. But how do you always keep your eye on the ball? The antidote is the Torah itself. You always have to revisit that Torah. When you revisit Torah, then you understand clearly what your objective is. That is my objective. If that's your objective, I have what I need to address that objective. Therefore, I don't get distracted. But the moment you forget about that objective, then it becomes you. That's the ego becomes inflated. Once the ego becomes inflated, it's me. It's no longer that. Therefore, the golden path to everything is the equidistant point. When it comes to ego, you have to keep continuously deflating it, hammering it, pounding it into the ground. Only then do you see the objective. Once you see the objective, everything else falls away, and therefore that gives you the best chance to succeed. Okay, we're going to stop here, and something we have to focus on and try to think about before Rosh Hashanah. And if we're able to internalize it to a slurry, we keep our eye on the ball, and with Hashem's help, knowing what we're trying to do, He'll give us all the assistance which is necessary. Everybody be well. Have a good day.
Daf at 11, Rabbi?
11 o'clock, Daf. Yes.
See you
Take care.
later.
Everybody be well. Take care.
You too, Rabbi. You too, Rabbi. Thank you.
Yeah.